December 18 marks International Migrants Day. The occasion highlights the misery and hardships that migrants encounter as they leave their home in hope of finding a better place to live. The following report takes a closer look at the main reasons behind migration that has turned into a serious global challenge.
Migration, an ongoing phenomenon, seems to be endless. Countries around the world have always had to deal with migrants coming from various destinations. A broad range of factors contribute to the movement of people, including economic challenges, extreme poverty, or conflict. According to the United Nations, around 281 million people were international migrants in 2020. That represents 3.6% of the global population. In recent years, the wave of migration has taken a different turn as Europe and the United States have become the main destinations for migrants. Large numbers of people have tried to reach Europe from countries in West Asia, including Iraq and Syria, both witnessing wars in which the US and some Western states have played a big role. The US itself has faced a growing number of asylum seekers trying to reach there from Central American countries. The root causes for that include economic crises blamed on US policies towards these countries. Migration has also become a source of political tensions among countries, with the latest examples in Europe. Belarus and neighboring Poland are at odds over the situation of thousands of migrants stranded at the border. The UK and France have also locked horns over the rising number of migrants trying to cross the English Channel into Britain. All this comes as many migrants lose their lives through their perilous journey.
As the migrants were drowning, the British government should have at least saved them and deported them to France. No problem, but at least they would have been alive.
If they make it, they will have to spend the rest of their days in squalid conditions in border camps. And even if they manage to get into the country of their dreams, things won't be better either. Discrimination, hunger, and misery is all they will find, issues that contribute to the reason drawing widespread criticism against Europe and the US over their migration policies. There have been other destinations for migrants too. Iran is one of them. It hosts Afghans fleeing poverty and conflict triggered by 2 decades of the US-led military presence in Afghanistan that came to an end just this past August. Several millions of Afghans currently live in Iran, which, according to the UN, make one of the largest refugee populations. The world body has on various occasions hailed Iran for accepting the Afghan refugees. All in all, experts believe the global migration crisis can only be tackled through a concerted effort by countries and enough determination to end conflicts across the world.
Let's discuss this a little further with Barry Grossman, who's an international lawyer. Barry Grossman, welcome. When you take a look at this Global Migration Day, obviously it's a day to be marked because of the sheer numbers that are involved. About 280 million is what we had in our report, as indicated there. But one of the aspects behind this is the fact that many are fleeing conflict, not only for their safety, but also for better economic conditions. And this ties in with foreign policies of certain countries that are waging wars, which results in conflicts. How much of a factor do you think that plays into this picture?
Well, I think that clearly everything. Let's not overlook the fact that in recent decades, the U.S. itself has redefined the very concept of warfare to include not just conventional warfare with a military presence on the ground, but a warfare basically across all aspects of society, including the economy, propaganda, foreign policy, and all manner of other interests, and clearing the way for Atlantic world corporations to essentially buy natural resources from developing world economies at very low prices, while at the same time controlling retail markets in those same countries for high-priced Atlantic world manufactured goods. But if we're going to recognize a day like this, I think it's important to understand what the Atlantic world's current policy is towards migrants and what it's not. And we've seen a great deal of change in recent years. It probably started in earnest when the Australian government started to ignore its obligations under the UN Convention on the Status of Refugees and literally push back refugees and migrants fleeing war zones out to sea and to leave them there to die. And of course, that same policy was later picked up in Europe to the point where I think it's safe to say now that the convention that was struck in the 50s, the Convention on the Status of Refugees, was never intended to be more than an instrument of the Cold War to fight communism and to convey privileges to people that meet the democratic profile, namely white Anglo-Saxon types who wanted to leave the former Soviet Union and make their way to Europe and other Atlantic world countries. At the same time, we haven't seen those countries which are primarily responsible for creating the conflicts and essentially preventing countries from developing their economies take any responsibility for their actions in those countries, bearing in mind the connection between those actions and the creation of this flow of migrants and refugees. Of course, Atlantic world countries like to distinguish between economic refugees and people that are fleeing violence and terrorism. But in many ways, it's an artificial distinction. But what we can say is that across the board, pretty much all Atlantic world countries have entirely renounced their legal obligations to accept and process genuine refugee applications by basically turning them away, herding them into corrals and detention centers and treating them from the start as criminals, no matter what their age is, whether they're still children or elderly people, and no matter where they come from. And all of this, of course, is a great tragedy because there's nothing that lies in store for those people other than a life of misery and humiliation. And it's high time this changed. It's high time that countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and their various allies started to take responsibility for the havoc that they've wreaked around the globe that has set into motion this never-ending flow of refugees. And at the same time, I'll finish on this, it's time for regional countries to take some responsibility for the fact that there's this new normal now that sees countries reserving the right to forfeit the citizenship of individuals and essentially make them stateless. We've seen that in Myanmar and other countries, and now we're starting to see the same kind of policies being implemented in the Atlantic world, where governments are reserving to themselves the right to forfeit the citizenship of their own people, be they migrants or not, on grounds which they decide on the fly. And of course, citizenship was always considered an inalienable right. That has changed, and this is only going to aggravate the situation even more. But all in all, there is nothing to celebrate, certainly nothing to celebrate when it comes to this year's recognition of this rather tragic day.
Thank you very much for that. Barry Grossman, international lawyer from Bali.